Hi, everybody, and welcome back. In this webinar, as I said in the introduction of the first part, we are attempting to share our knowledge with you about affordable housing challenges and opportunities facing independent living centers, people with disabilities, and in fact the state of California. We have Leslie Brewer, Michael Allen, Sarah Triano, Jeff Michelson, and Leila Tauri Kumar, as well as myself, as the presenters today. We are doing this as a part of a grant that we got from the state to both influence and hopefully have some participation in the California State 811 grant proposal for as a part of an $85 million allotment that Congress made available. And we are also doing this as a way of sharing our knowledge peer-to-peer to assist you guys in maybe contacting and engaging your community housing developers to try to create opportunities for integrated housing for our consumers and yours. So we're going to continue now, and again, if you have questions, go ahead and raise your hands, but maybe we'll take questions at the end so we can get through the flow of this. And if it's really, really urgent, just go ahead and ask questions along the way, but we will be preferring that you do that at the end. It will be, for this second part, it'll be mainly myself and Leila doing this, but Michael and Sarah and Jeff and Leslie, Leslie also, but Leslie and Michael and Jeff and Sarah are all available for questions as well on both this topic and what we discussed in the first part if any of you have questions that came to you during our break. So I'm going to go ahead and begin this. And first of all, though, before I do, I want to thank CFILC, and I especially want to thank Rosemarie for all the time and energy she put into making this possible for us. We really do appreciate the work that you've done, Rosemarie, and we sincerely appreciate CF's sponsoring this platform for us. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and attempt to move a slide here. It worked. All right, so as many of you may know, the California Redevelopment Act was essentially dissolved this year to help meet some of the state's budgetary problems. In spite of that, there's a continuing demand for affordable housing, for building and maintaining local infrastructure, and for eliminating blight, and most importantly in California, creating jobs. And this is a really, really unstable era for all of us, and so these attempts to keep our local communities vibrant have been challenged by the state coming in and essentially dissolving the 399 redevelopment agencies that local governments were using to take tax increments and to apply those towards local development. So a tax increment is they declare, a city will declare a redevelopment zone and create an agency for redevelopment. And in that zone, whatever taxes that were created were existing during the previous, or then the increments as they improve the zone by building infrastructure and housing and businesses and so forth, those tax increments go to back to the local agency for development. Well, the governor decided that that was a good place to get some money to help with the budgetary problems that California's been facing. So he was able to successfully pass legislation and get those agencies dissolved. The cities contested that, and the Supreme Court found in favor of the state. And so now there is a scramble to try to figure out what are we going to do now? How are we going to continue building local, affordable, and accessible housing, building new libraries, building new, maintaining historical zones, and so forth. And so what I'm going to try to do is give you guys a little bit of information about what the possibilities are in a post-Redevelopment Act environment. So redevelopment agencies, as I said, created zones. They used these tax increments to build projects. A minimum of 20% of that funding was to be spent by law on building affordable housing, although local agencies could increase that amount at their own discretion. It built all kinds of other things. You know, in Santa Monica, we've built libraries, we've built housing, we built all kinds of things here. And essentially the city of Santa Monica, after the earthquake in 1994, the Northridge earthquake, declared the entire city a redevelopment zone and used that to basically use tax increments throughout the city to put back into a local fund, which became pretty well off. And so we've been able to do a lot of development over the past 20 years almost through this fund. We don't have that anymore. So what could we do going forward? One of the possibilities is there new state legislation could establish a housing opportunity and market stabilization trust fund, and that would be a permanent funding source for affordable housing that developers could use in the state. It could be funded by any number of ways, but one of the ways is a $75 recording fee on each real estate document. So that could raise, you know, well over $500 million, perhaps even up to $750 million a year, which could be put into a trust fund for funding. Now, this failed in the last session, but in the past elections, there has become an even greater majority of people who might be voting for such a trust fund. So it's possible that this could be revived again this year. And if so, this is something that you might want to take whatever small percentages you have for lobbying and apply to that, or you might just go and do some quote-unquote education to the local representatives about how great something like that might be. The other thing is to create business improvement districts, BIDs. In this case, they charge property assessments. It's like a tax in the business development area. Santa Monica also had one of those in which the area around the famous Santa Monica Promenade for several blocks was a BID. And the monies that they raised for that was used to do, among other things, improvements, maintenance. They hired people who are the so-called ambassadors, who are kind of greeters in the downtown area, and it's been generally used to build up tourism and public interest in that local business improvement district. Local grants and bond financing. The general funds of cities can be used to build housing. In Santa Monica, we have something called Community Corporation, which uses only Santa Monica's general funding to build housing. And so that's one of the ways you can do this. The cities are going to see an increase to the property tax revenues by winding down the redevelopment agencies, and so they can then direct some of that to affordable housing if they so choose. This is where local initiatives might be developed, with independent living centers taking the lead. They can issue lease revenue bonds to build housing, and that would be backed by community benefit, the development agreements that deliver jobs, tax revenues, transit-oriented development, and so forth. Well, as a part of a community benefit, I'll get to this more a little bit in a little while, but one of the benefits you can convince your cities of is, or your local housing authorities, is that it is a community benefit to provide housing for very affordable housing for people with disabilities that is both affordable and accessible. So that's one aspect. Community Facility District, and this is based on the Mello-Roos Communities Facilities Act of 1982. Districts can be created by creating a special tax or bond to build, rehab, maintain, etc., a wide range of facilities. And so this requires approval by 2/3 of the qualified electorate, whatever that may be. and it's almost always used to develop previously undeveloped land. So it's not a redevelopment, so to speak, but it's original initial development on previously undeveloped areas. Density and other bonuses. If developers build more units, they make more money. So a way to get them to build, to get the density bonuses, they agree to provide more affordable, accessible housing. So this can be from very low percentages up to even 35%. But senior and other projects that are required with 5% very low income, 10% low income, or 25% moderate income, and then they're given up to a 20% density bonus. It does allow, if they do even more than that, for bonuses up to 35%. If you get higher, it's my opinion, and I think others share this, that if you get much higher than 20 or 25%, you're bordering on getting into non-diversified housing. So it tends to then be, you know, a building for seniors and people with disabilities, or you know, something where if it's all seniors or if it's all a particular kind of thing, they get a big density bonus, they build more units, but in fact they wind up in effect continuing the ghettoization or the segregation of people into that type of housing. So it's a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing if it goes up too high. But it's a way to get developers to include affordable and accessible housing in their development agreements. A DA is basically a developer comes to a city and says, we want to build something, and the city says, okay, well, we're going to restrict you to this, that, and the other, and in agreement to do certain things we would like to see, we will give you the right to do certain things, this, that, and the other. So it's a negotiation between the cities and the housing development, the housing developers, or between the housing authorities and the housing developers, which eventually comes usually to the councils for approval, the city councils, and private developers are then given particular rights to develop what their projects want to be in exchange for community benefits. These benefits can include environmental, green buildings. They can include local units for local like teachers, firemen, police, etc. They can get agreements by agreeing to hire local employees within the area, and so forth. One of those community benefits could easily be, as I said, to include more people with significant disabilities. Public land, cities can give their land to developers in exchange for buildings that provide benefit, i.e. housing, back to the city. The value of the property that's given can be an equity stake in the development of the property. And this then allows for repayment and profit participation back to the city, and that revenue generated then could go into a city or a local housing trust, affordable housing trust. There are not too many cities in particularly large areas that want to do that. They're usually trying to make parkland out of whatever remaining public lands there are, but you'll find that those types of agreements often pit environmentalists against housing developers or people that are advocating for affordable housing. Community development block grants, well, a portion of those can go to affordable housing activities. So those could include, and CDBGs continue to come through to the cities for a variety of things, but the housing activities can include acquisition, construction, rehabilitation, development of public improvement projects, and they're usually done by community-based development organizations like Santa Monica's Community Corporation, which is a nonprofit community-based housing developer. There are other ways to go about doing this. We've just begun to start to see the creativity that is going to be blossoming in the wake of the Redevelopment Act. And so it's a good opportunity for independent living centers and the disability community to join this conversation and to be proposing creative ways to think about affordable housing development. We would strongly encourage you to be addressing the need, particularly for very low income housing, because that's the people, those are the populations that we serve who are most needy and are most difficult to place, people on SSI or limited pension benefits and so forth. So we strongly encourage you, when you engage your local community housing developers and housing authorities and so forth, city council members and others involved in housing, the commissions on housing locally, to have them start thinking about ways to not just meet the HUD requirements for so-called accessibility, but to go beyond that, to do set-asides for very low, to do set-asides for extremely modified housing that will allow people with very significant disabilities to live in them, and also to insist that they do the kind of follow through and enforcement of that if they do agree to build that kind of housing. So, for example, we don't want to see a whole lot of wonderful housing built for people who use wheelchairs that's been modified specifically for that purpose go to people who don't use wheelchairs. So that means engaging them in conversations about how do you do fair lotteries or divide lotteries up so that you have people competing among classes of tenancies. So, you don't have everybody in one lottery pool competing for apartments in a new development that might include set-asides. You would say have a separate lottery for people who would qualify for those set-asides based on their disabilities, and have them enter into a lottery themselves that would be separate for that kind of thing. And I believe these can meet all the tests of affordable and fair housing requirements, but you need to work closely with those local agencies. Some of the other ways to get housing going are HUD Section 108 loans. They're foreign capital investors. There's a lot of money coming in from foreign developers in the United States still. Taking brownfield areas where there's been areas that are extremely polluted and using the funds after those are cleaned up to meet EPA standards to build housing and other kinds of mixed-use developments. Transit-oriented development is a big thing now. Everybody wants to reduce the number of automobiles, and so mixed-use housing close to transit corridors and transit hubs is a really big thing. We can use that opportunity to say, all right, well, if you build housing for people who use public transit, which happen to be, in many cases, some of our consumers, then that would often include affordable, very affordable, and accessible housing. The renewable energy tax credits is another way. And finally, although this is not happening as much anymore, there are opportunities still for using military base reuse in California. Some of those, for instance, in Orange County, that was turned over to be this great urban park. We learned later that millions and millions of dollars have been spent on the park and really no development has taken place to speak of. Maybe it's time to reassess the usage of that land for housing. In the Monterey area, for example, they turned Fort Ord into a new state university. Maybe some of that could be repurposed as well. There are other areas, because California has had a lot of military bases and then a lot of them have been deactivated. There are still probably areas in most communities that can be considered for that type of housing. There's one in Long Beach here where they have taken former military housing and converted it specifically to housing for homeless people. So that means it's supportive housing in terms of programs and services. It is for very, very low-income people. And that, as the housing has developed, has now been diversified to include families, to include people who are coming from abusive environments. And now, as they're building new housing in the same area, as they continue to develop the property out, we're speaking with them about how they can do set-asides for significantly disabled people. So there are lots of ways in which you can build these kinds of cooperations, partnerships, collaborations, or just use the weight of your community to try to get the folks who do housing policy and development in your communities to start re-engaging with our community and building housing that serves our needs as well as the rest of the communities. Again, we'll take questions on this in a little while, but now I'm going to turn it over to Leila Tauri Kumar, who will tell you about some of the partnerships that we've been developing here at the Westside Center for Independent Living.
Thank you, Alan. Greetings, everyone. Just take a second to get situated here. Sorry. Oh boy, now I'm in the beginning. Sorry. Do you know what slide we are?
Yes. Hold on for 1 second.
Rosemary, can you reset to where Leila is, please?
This is Leslie. I believe she was on slide 54.
I can find it. Thank you, Leslie. Okay, I think we just, there we go. So, greetings everyone. Sorry about that interruption. What I'm going to talk about today is developing partnerships with developers and community development corporations within affordable housing, and how you can prepare to be ready for 8/11, but also to advocate for more affordable, accessible housing in your community. So I want to start with a few words about the industry, and we call it an industry for a reason. It really is a machine and an industry that turns out housing, although it's been a little bit derailed by redevelopment. That's what it's known to be among housing professionals. And I want to just point out a couple of technicalities. Affordable housing developers can be for-profit or nonprofit. And their missions range from just building affordable low-income housing to serving people with a specific disability, which we've seen as a kind of a wrongful interpretation of Olmstead and fair housing and HUD 202 and HUD 811. The nonprofit affordable housing developers are called community development corporations. They're often listed in directories. In Southern California, they're in a directory through the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing, or SCANT. In the Bay Area, it's the Nonprofit Housing Association. I think in San Diego, it's called the San Diego Housing Federation. So look for a regional housing association that does advocacy and promotion of affordable housing for your specific region. And that's a good place to start for networking. And basically what you want to do is look for events that are targeted through your local housing association. And there are a variety of events that are open to nonprofit partners, community members, et cetera. They're open. There's no screening involved. And so you have access to people who work in affordable housing. You can also, if you know of some developers in your area, you can get on their website and listserv to find out more about what's going on. Some of the events that you can join in to network are groundbreakings for new developments, mixers. They have quarterly or semi-annual mixers just to get together. They're a friendly bunch. There's an annual conference, Housing California, which focuses on advocacy efforts and technical assistance and kind of how-to. It's where developers convene to talk about challenges in the industry and more operational issues. There are community meetings and grand openings for new buildings. It's all about relationships. So you're not going to go and network and right away secure a partnership. Some of these partnerships can take a year or longer to solidify in a contract and set asides for your consumers. But it's important to note that The reason it takes so long is because of the complexity of the housing development process and the business models that inform your partnerships. So every developer has a different business model. It's critical to understand the roles of all the parties involved, because you need to understand who's doing what in the housing development process. You need to understand that because of their need to access a variety of funding sources and utilization of the expertise of engineers, architects, local government, environmental review, etc., that there are delays in the process. And so we need to have reasonable expectations. I remember working on the development, and they had broken ground, and they found it was in the harbor of LA, and they found an oil pipeline in the middle of the project. And so that stalled the project and required that the developer do additional due diligence to move the process forward and build their 100-unit building. You need to understand roles in terms of what you can negotiate in securing an MOU for your partnership. What's possible, what isn't possible, and we'll talk a little bit more about contracts and MOUs in a little while. And thinking about the business model and their experience versus the needs of your tenants and consumers. And there's a natural tension there, because the developer's job and pressure is to figure out what they're going to build, get the money, and build it. And your priority is the needs of your consumers. So that's a tension, but also the opportunity for a conversation. Who plays a role in development? You don't just need to find somebody who has the title developer. They can work for a developer, or they could be a subcontractor of the developer. Anybody that you talk to at a housing mixer or a grand opening is going to help point you in the right direction. So the architects are responsible for design implementation and 504 requirements. Developers, property managers who may manage a portfolio and a number of waiting lists that your consumers can access. There are asset/building managers who have a more financial and investor or performance focus, but they generally oversee the property management partner or affiliate and know the portfolio or buildings that they're managing in a region. There are also the service providers, such as independent living centers. There's regional center partnerships. There's homeless service providers. And then some affordable housing developers have a resident and community services department. And they can be your strongest ally in a partnership in terms of speaking to the needs of the tenants and making sure that your voice is included in the process. They can also tell you what's coming up, what their employer or developer is building, and where you might be able to meet with the developer and jump into the process. There are also contractors who build the building, but they know everybody, and while they're entrepreneurs, they know everything from A to Z about the building, and they know who's who in their particular region. And engineers, lastly. And then behind the scenes, just for consideration, there are other folks involved, communities who have very strong opinions about what kind of building they want in their neighborhood, and you can be an advocate and provide education in that respect and form alliances with developers around promoting those multifamily buildings in those communities. There are also banks and lenders, and then local, state, or in the case of 811, the federal agencies. So a lot of players involved. A little more about the buildings themselves. Keep in mind that buildings are an asset to the developer and investor. This also does, for better or worse, inform who they want to serve. So that's where our interest in being advocates and educating them on the range of needs that our consumers have and the community needs is really important. The buildings are also a liability. So we have to do a lot of work to dispel any misnomers and myths that they have about who we're serving and what that means on a day-to-day basis. Building projects are named as limited partnerships, and that's to remove the developer from the liability associated with operating and owning a building. And we'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about MOUs. So a little more about supportive and affordable housing. The tenant ideally pays no more than 30% towards rent and utilities, and never more than 50%. A tenant household has a lease or agreement that does not have limits on the length of tenancy, so it's permanent for as long as the tenant and occupants meet the lease conditions. And what is supportive housing? The definition of supportive housing, it's meant for individuals or families who are homeless or at risk of being homeless. Now this is really specific to 2012 and probably the last 5 years, where a lot of advocacy has been done around providing housing for people who are homeless or at risk of housing. And I think the Independent Living Center's challenge here is to make sure that we are making the same case for people coming out of institutions who have chronic health issues, who have mobility challenges, etc., because the danger is that all of the housing we build, and in Los Angeles this has been the case, much of the housing has been built for the homeless population and frequent users of the hospitals and emergency rooms, and the skilled nursing facilities have been left out of a lot of that prioritization. But this is the industry kind of standard working knowledge so that you can use it to push our agenda. In addition to being homeless or at risk of homeless, the folks generally served through supportive housing today in California, they have multiple barriers to employment, multiple barriers to housing stability, including mental health, chronic health issues, and substance abuse issues. And so you can see it's a very distinct population that for one reason or another has become kind of misleading, and it's prioritizing a certain population for the betterment of ending homelessness, but it doesn't address everybody who has an affordable housing need. And what is affordable housing? Affordable housing has income-determined rent, so it decides that if somebody's making $15,000 a year, they should be paying 30% of their income towards rent. There's an annual recertification process that tenants have to be ready to go through, and that includes file reviews and providing verification that they still meet those income requirements. Affordable housing may or may not include vouchers, HUD 811 vouchers, and that's has vouchers included in the proposal, which is why it's a great opportunity. And depending on the community that the developer is deciding to serve, the services can be light or low need through intensive, and it depends on the financing that the developer acquires as well as their mission. Affordable housing is managed through a partnership, which includes the project owner or sponsor, property management, supportive service providers, and there can be several, not just one. Ideally, there are several, relevant public agencies, and tenants. For community and social services, all tenants have access to some level of services. I want to emphasize access here. It's a choice. And so it's possible that that's interpreted differently in other parts of the state and the country, but in Los Angeles, at least, in my experience, services have been optional, even with the most challenging population of the chronically homeless. For supportive housing, support ensures retention of housing by addressing substance abuse, mental health, chronic health issues, and other barriers to housing. So the idea generally is what do the tenants in supportive housing or affordable housing need to make sure that they retain their housing. And that is the most fundamental interest that you'll find with affordable housing developers. They want to keep their units full and their buildings paid for. Service providers actively engage tenants to access services, even though they are optional and they are not a condition of tenancy. And a little more about services. They should ideally reflect the tenant's needs and goals as identified by the target population, their disability, being a senior, families, emancipated youth, or veterans. And that's where you can really offer your expertise and provide insight to what your consumers really need versus what the funding says. And they're not mandatory, again. Services require adjustment as the needs of the tenant community evolve or change, so meaning those services are not static and indefinite. They may need certain things to move into housing and secure the housing, and year 1 and year 3 or 5 of operation may look very different. Aging in place is also a theme in senior housing, where seniors may live in affordable housing for 10 or 20 years and need some services to stay in their units. So some examples of kind of the changing needs of a community. SSI recipients may want to return to work. Another example is the desire to address food security and nutrition issues. So maybe the focus is moving people in and getting their benefits, but then you realize in year 2 that, wow, people are running out of money for healthy food. How is the program going to address that? And services should be accessible and relevant, both linguistically, culturally, and accessible. And services, another key component which has really become more emphasized in applications for housing sources, is evaluation of services. Most of the applications that developers have to respond to in order to get the money to build ask an evaluation question, and you want to make sure that when you partner with them, you're helping them figure out how you'll evaluate the services you're providing and make sure they're realistic. The evaluation of services should occur on a regular basis and should go beyond compliance and regulatory agreements, meaning make sure they're relevant to what you're doing. And I think that in this case, you can make the case that if folks are coming out of a skilled nursing facility or another high-cost utilization place, that there's a cost benefit to being housed in the community. Services are voluntary. Usually case management, light to intensive, is available. Support groups, healthy living groups, parenting groups, health and hygiene groups. Those are all examples. It can be an art therapy group. It's, subject to interpretation. There's substance abuse groups, behavioral health groups, life skills, cooking, general education or ESL, money management. So depending on your independent living center model, these are all things that you can offer to leverage and encourage these partnerships, because these are things that the developer is looking to provide without having to pay for them. There are a variety of development models. There's a scattered site model, which may be townhomes or single-family homes that are subleased to individuals, and they may house homeless or formerly homeless individuals or transition-age youth or any population. Rent-subsidized apartments that are leased in the open market, usually in urban areas, and can range anywhere between 35 to 150 units of housing. And these are generally the supportive and supportive housing units that can be interpreted as very segregated, actually. And then there's the long-term set-aside of units within privately owned buildings. And we'll talk about a couple of models with the set-aside coming up. In development, development can range from a 2 to 3 year process up to 7 years, depending on what the developer encounters along the way in acquiring the land and community opposition and financing. There are a range of factors. In the financing, there's a financing and pre-development phase. This is where the developer will design, plan, and raise money to build the building. And they're basically building a layer cake of financing sources until they reach the potentially $20, $30, $40 million that they need to put together a large multifamily building. There's the site review, zoning, and entitlements process, and this occurs during the pre-development phase. They have to get all their clearances to move forward and break ground. Like I mentioned, you can find a pipeline, an oil well, a toxic substances, burial grounds, things that need mitigation that weren't readily obvious when the developer acquired the land. And then the development loans have to close so that they can break ground, construction begins, and community partners begin to solidify. It's helpful for independent living centers to get in early in the process so that they can influence and be a partner in the financing phase. And there are 3 flavors of money in affordable housing. There's capital, operating, and service dollars. Financing categories are development sources. These are funding for both the hard and soft costs of new construction and or rehabilitation. Land acquisition, construction, architectural services, appraisals, engineering, legal costs, fees and permits, rent-up costs, and other costs. There are operating sources. These provide subsidies to cover the gap between the costs of operating the building, utilities, maintenance, etc., and what the tenants can afford to pay. And this is why the Section 8 vouchers and the HUD 811 vouchers are attractive to the developer. It helps offset their operating costs. And then there are service sources. These cover the cost of supportive services at any level, whether they're low, moderate, or intensive service plans. They should meet the needs of the tenants and cover case management, health, and mental health services. And again, this is where independent living centers can leverage those relationships and provide a match for operating while meeting the needs of the community. Some terminology you need to know. Maybe not memorize, but know. Key partner terminology. The owner. These are the principal long-term interest in seeing that the project is completed. So this is Mercy Housing, Link Housing, Abode Communities, large developers. They drive the planning and development process. And they also determine the mission, whether it's blatantly stated or read between the lines. They dedicate the resources to oversee the project. The developer. They bring the development to completion. They take the project ideas to ready for occupancy. They're responsible for all project development tasks. They hire a development consultant, or they have in-house developers, a development team. And they may partner with a nonprofit or for-profit developer. Sometimes you'll see 2 developers working together on a particular project because of one or the other's experience. There's the property manager. They're responsible for day-to-day management of the property once completed. They are the key to the financial and physical viability of the project, the sustainability of the project. The property manager needs to be effective to make sure that the project is successful. It requires skills, experience, and familiarity with legal issues and funder requirements. And they must maintain compliance with local, state, and federal laws that govern fair housing. With the property management and services work very closely to make sure that the needs of the tenants are met in conjunction with compliance and regulatory issues. And then the service provider, they lead the delivery of supportive services to residents There may be more than one service provider. They will be addressing multiple needs of residents, and there's usually a lead service provider that the developer identifies. Typically, services are needed to ensure ongoing and effective services, and the service partner or provider is accountable to funders, just like property management. Who does your agency need to work with, and how are they involved? You need to work with the architects. They have clients with buildings in construction or development, and they can tell you who is aligned with your mission, who's doing progressive, affordable, and accessible buildings or universal design. And then the developers, when you meet a project manager, you can ask them what buildings they have in the pipeline and what projects are under construction. That's your opportunity. Property managers, they manage the buildings, and you want to ask them about their wait lists and lease-ups of new buildings. Ask them about their portfolio and see what they tell you, and see if there's a way to help them replenish their wait lists. Make it easy on them. Service providers, residents and community services, they oversee the partnerships in the community, and they may, depending on the developer, have a more passive or active role in negotiating opportunities for you to get involved. Internally, there's always a negotiation between resident services and development. The developer usually wins because it's a numbers game. Meaning it has to meet the budget, the population has to fit in with the type of units built, the size of the units, the number of the units, and the rent levels. And then the contractors, they can tell you what they're building and who their clients are, and perhaps set up meetings for you. Some other important considerations for your agency. You really need to have a point person that's out there meeting with developers so that when a developer needs you, they know exactly who to call to follow up. You need to have a clear idea of what you can and cannot provide for the foreseeable future. A tax credit memorandum of understanding, they require a 10-year commitment from the service provider, between the service provider and the developer. So you need to be comfortable with that, or at least comfortable with the 30-day escape clause. You need to make a commitment and back it up with a letter of commitment, and also with your actions. Your MOU should be between the developer and owner, the limited partnership or the building. The building should be named, and your agency. And you need to think through how every step happens. Document the process for deliverables and action items. And your planning meetings really become the beginning of your operating manual for these partnerships, because you're going to be taking your agency from an in-house operation to an external operation. Other items that need your attention, and these are points where you really need to jump in and make sure you have a voice. During financing, it's challenging. There may be last-minute requests, and your support is critical. For one of the projects I'm going to talk about, the developer decided that it was going to be a special needs project 3 weeks before an application or financing deadline for the LA Housing Department. The service providers, including WCIL at the time, were really responsive in meeting the needs of the developer, and thus they secured that long-term set-aside. The ones that fail don't get asked back to the table. Accessibility in space. You need to ask to be included in the design review or have a focused discussion about what the community needs with the architects, compliance with fair housing regulations, what's possible, and also talk about how the shared or community spaces will be used or negotiated. So if there's a community room and there's case management offices, ideally you secure a portion of that space for your use in meeting the needs of the consumers or tenants in the set-aside. And service planning. Independent living centers have a distinct set of services, and so do resident services within the affordable housing world. So think about how the services connect, how the staff integrate, work together, message to consumers, Resident services are usually your best advocates, but they also have to meet compliance and reporting goals, so be supportive and on time for them. Contracts. It all falls apart over who buys the coffee, so you want to spell out schedules, space usage, how outreach will occur, who's in charge of what items, who's buying the coffee, do you have access to the refrigerator, all the expectations for all the parties. And the scope of work in your MOU with a developer should be very lengthy, probably 4 or 5 pages, and should be reviewed by a lawyer, your lawyer, not just theirs. Budget relationships. You want to create a combined budget that looks at all program aspects and sources. Make sure all the activities have a funding source and identify gaps early. You can fundraise. If you know you're going to be in a partnership and the building will be open in a year or 2, you can fundraise with your partner beyond 8/11, which will give you unit vouchers, and figure out what you need so that you can get ahead on the fundraising. And again, this will vary depending on the project. Leasing and operations. You want to plan for lease up early, and really the planning should happen about 6 months prior to opening a building. So refer to your MOU, be clear on your role, and offer what you can. You can offer to be a leasing site. Every developer, every building has an affirmative fair marketing plan, and you want to be able to provide them with access to a diverse range of consumers. And then also access and visibility of the housing opportunity. You can help make sure that when they're advertising for a building, that the process is clear, that there are language resources, bilingual staff, and staff support is critical. You want to offer to screen all applicants with disabilities and take that on yourself rather than leave that to a third-party property management group who may not have the best skill set for the job. And other advice. Start working on your marketing list early. Pre-screen applicants. Ask for the applications early and make sure that the process is in compliance with fair housing. Be a partner, be supportive. They may have a lottery, an online process, leasing offices at several sites, and multiple agencies competing for the same units. And that's why you want to be on top of your game. It's really hard, and it's a high pressure time for 3 to 6 months, but especially down to the wire, because developers lose money if they're not fully leased and occupied by the time once they receive their certificate of occupancy. They want to move everybody in as soon as the building is occupiable. And I'm just going to take about 5 more minutes to make sure we have enough time for the last section. All of this that I'm talking about is based on my experience working for a couple developers in LA, but with the Westside Center for Independent Living, where we branded Independent Housing Partners, IHPLA. And basically IHPLA was created to identify WCIL as a viable housing partner for developers who had service needs. And our vision was that all people with disabilities will have accessible, affordable, and permanent homes, and that by working in partnership, we expand housing choices for our tenants and stable communities for our partners. Our values are access, service, and partnership. We work with our partners by supporting them in writing service plans for their funding notices and responses to funding applications. We provide budget commitments for their request for proposals related to all funding sources, HUD 202, tax credit, City of Industry, which is a county source, HUD, that's the Housing Authority, and a variety of other sources where our goal is to secure set-asides. We have the ability to market leasing activities to a target population and thereby reducing vacancy rates. So that's attractive to developers. And we provide them with planning expertise around accessibility needs of our consumers or tenants and the future needs of senior tenants to meet ADA standards. These are all the services we provide. We provide independent living services, We pre-screen applicants for special needs set-asides. We provide assistance for rental applications, credit checks and application fee processing, first and last month's rental assistance and security deposit where necessary, ongoing services through peer counseling, advocacy, and facilitating groups for independent living skills, wellness programs, financial literacy, budgeting, consultation, and programs involving home modifications, and building meetings and tenant empowerment activities. And just two projects I'll mention. The model project, really Morgan Place was the gold standard, and it happened before the loss of redevelopment. But in 2006, WCIL and IHPLA worked with abode communities to secure 10 set-aside special needs units in a 55 and over affordable senior development of 55 units. Morgan Place is a model of a mixed population project where seniors with special needs, developmentally disabled seniors, and non-seniors without a physical disability. And our role was to assist them in planning the services and developing the budget, pre-screening tenants, and supporting leasing activities. And we still work closely with property management to resolve tenant issues and replenish their waiting list. We also worked to establish a resident council on site. It also has an accessible, edible community garden that tenants engage in. And Link Housing, we've worked with this developer on Ocean Breeze Apartments and Seasons at Compton. We have MOUs for both projects. WCIL and IHPLA plan to support the provision of services in both buildings and be responsive to tenant needs as they arise. And for tenants aging in place, provide reasonable accommodation and accessibility needs. Our service coordinators, their service coordinators meet with WCIL case managers and other service agencies on a monthly basis to ensure the needs of tenants are being met and units remain leased to our consumers. IHPLA has conducted 2 meet and greets at Ocean Breeze Apartments, so that's to let the tenants there know about our services. And we work closely with Link's property management company, Barker Management, to ensure evictions are avoided and wait lists are current. We also work with local government to advocate for reasonable accommodations during the waitlist process. We've outreached to 40 property management companies. We've established formal partnerships with developers and formal partnerships and systems of communication with property management companies, as well as advocacy and education for general plans and housing elements. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to the group, Other Opportunities for Housing and Olmstead Implementation, and I'll take questions at that.
And let me just say, you know, at the risk of, you know, that old adage that if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem starts to look like a nail, and I am a litigator, I just wanted to make folks aware of the fact that, you know, Alan touched on some important issues about, you know, the kind of housing that we're going to build and the kind of accessibility and affordability and other programmatic requirements that are attached to it. And then Layla touched on some of those issues as well. I'm currently involved in litigation against the city of Los Angeles and its former redevelopment agency that suggests to me that somebody was really asleep at the switch, suggests that people were really asleep at the switch when it came to the issue of federal money or state money going out to private developers to build units that were supposed to be 504 or ADA or Fair Housing Act or state law accessible, and just weren't. And I think we have a deficit of units that were supposed to be 504 accessible in Los Angeles that may, you know, reach into the hundreds or even as many as 1,000 units. So, you know, Alan said we've got to be vigilant about enforcing these obligations, and I want to say from the beginning, it's not enough for somebody just to tell you that they're complying with these accessibility requirements. You know, we have to find a way to get in on the ground, because the cost of fixing it after they're built is so much greater than it is to do it right in the first place.
My name is Leslie Brewer, and I'm the Director of Advocacy and Services here at Placer Independent Resource Services in Auburn. Originally, I started out as what we used to call the empowerment team leader, and one of the very first groups that I formed and worked with was on housing. Living in Placer County, we have a huge NIMBYism against any affordable housing being built. So we, in my advocacy group, were looking in the community at other types of funding that Placer County wasn't tapping into. At the time, we started forming, sorry, I need to go back. We had a speaker come and talk to us from HUD who talked to us about continuum of care funding that the city of Roseville, who's in our jurisdiction, had applied for but had not gotten because HUD wanted them to have a more reasonable approach with the county and the other entities involved. And that's what a continuum of care is. It's a regional or local planning body that coordinates housing and services for homeless families and individuals. Unfortunately, what we're hearing a lot is that the services are tied into it, and unfortunately that's part of continuum of care funding is services that are tied into it. Let's see. In California, last year in 2011, California received over $274 million in HUD continuum of care monies. And I've put down here samples of some of the bigger cities, such as Sacramento City in the county, continuum of care getting over $14 million, Los Angeles in the county getting $88 million, and San Francisco getting $20 million. In our small little county, we have what we call the Placer Consortium on Homelessness, which is our group that is our continuum of care. It's run by a board, which I am now the board chair of different community-based organizations, the County Health and Human Services, many different city entities, the faith-based community, and one thing that we want is to have homeless or formerly homeless individuals on our board. Continuum care money is primarily for the chronically homeless individuals with a disability, and the definition of what's chronically homeless changes year to year. PCOH now is in the process of becoming a 501c3 nonprofit. We've come up with the name of the Homeless Resource Council of the Sierras, and we want to become a nonprofit because the way the HUD continuum of care funding is going is that we need to be able to apply for the funding ourselves. Back in 2009, Placer County was awarded $847,000. And to a lot of the places that I showed in the examples, that's a small drop in the bucket. But when you start out with nothing and you build it up over the last 8 years, you know, that was a huge amount. In 2010, we merged with Nevada County Continuum of Care. Nevada County had never gotten any Continuum of Care monies, so they joined with us. And in 2010, we were all very excited that our continuum brought in over $1 million, and it was the first time that funding was awarded to Nevada County. They have 3 projects now. Last year, the funding that our area was awarded was $1,399,000. I have also on here different continuum of care web links that I can send out so that you can look at your area. There's good and bad with continuum of care funding, just like any other thing. In Placer County, we have no developers knocking at our doors looking to build complexes. We have one apartment complex that's been in the work of being developed for 14 years. We have a NIMBYism group that's alive and well that's been fighting development since its inception. At this point, last year, there's no more blocks that can be filed. All the environmental impact studies have been done over and over again. And now the whole problem is they need one last little chunk of like $10 million to finish developing. So anytime that we can get any piece of funding to develop any type of housing, we're just thrilled. It's not a perfect world, but it's what we're trying to do. And that's my example.
Thank you, Leslie. You guys turn that down, please. So, all right, that pretty much is our presentation. We have a few more minutes for questions, and if you do have a question, can you please say who you're directing your question to? In the meantime, though, I want to thank everybody for joining and participating in this webinar. It's a conundrum we're all facing here. I am a board member of the National American Civil Liberties Union, and so while I don't think that every nail needs to be hammered, there are many that hammering is the best way to go about it. So I do appreciate litigation when it comes around, and there are perhaps ways in which people who are being litigated against can present in their best defense cooperation and collaboration with disability rights groups and independent living centers to show that they're not necessarily the bad guys. In the case of the suit in Los Angeles, a couple of the developers that were being sued were actually people that are beginning to partner with us, and so I think that they, as an example, can help nudge others to get on the boat as well and to be a part of our initiatives here. Now, if you want to get the copies of these PowerPoints, as far as I'm concerned, you can have mine. The webinar is available, as you're seeing here in the little box. We'll send out an email that tells you how to go about getting the webinar recording and the PowerPoint to anyone who asks for it. So please contact Rosemarie at CF, and if you don't get any response, you can contact me at alan@wcil.org, and I'll pass the request on up to Rosemarie. But Rosemarie's address is Rosemarie, Rosemarie, at cfilc.org. Any questions?
Is there a national organization of like property managers or developers or something that we can start to go to provide education for on a much larger scale locally? It seems like we just, get 2 or 3 and then go away, or,
There's a question here in this room, you may not have heard it. Is there a national organization of apartment managers which we can do lobbying with or education with, I should say? Michael, do you know anything about that, perhaps?
I would say that there are 2 that you might consider, and they are sort of paired, at least in terms of their activities in Washington, D.C. One is the National Apartment Association.
Right.
It has an affiliate in California, which I think is called the California Apartment Association. And that may be the best point of contact. The other is called the National Multi-Housing Council. And again, these are interest groups, that at least in Washington push, and I assume in Sacramento, push the interests of their members, but they are a point of contact, and they do participate, regularly in fair housing, anti-discrimination, marketing, etc. And it seems to me that you would get to a lot of people if you tried to use that vehicle.
Okay, thank you. You can Google those, I'm sure, for contact information. Any other questions before we sign off? We really greatly appreciate all of your participation. It's nice to know that there's statewide interest in this issue, because it is really, I think the housing issue was the basis for the beginnings of the independent living movement in the first place, and this couldn't be more critical and more important to most of our consumers, and I'm sure all of the other ILs as well can say pretty much the same. That one of our biggest demands lately has been not just accessible housing, but accessible housing that people can afford on their very limited incomes. And so the more we can continue a statewide effort to develop and support that type of housing, I think the better our consumers will be in the long run. Thanks all for joining, and we look forward to seeing and meeting with you again soon. Thanks again to CFILC for sponsoring this website.